In another video I made about progress, I said that physically human beings have not progressed over what we were thousands of years ago, since we are in general weaker, slower and less flexible than we were thousands of years ago. So someone mentioned to me that we live longer. Our lifespan, general lifespan, average lifespan of today's modern people is much higher than it ever was. So isn't this a sign of progress, and is it not some kind of physical progress? So we have to address this question, and I would like to address in general the questions of progress and health and wellness. So first, let's talk about how much we live today compared to before. As far as we know, and most of our data comes from Europe. As far as we know, it is true that Europeans in the 17th, 18th and 19th century didn't live as much as we do. They died early of disease, of poor conditions, war, and other conditions which shortened their average lifespan. Today, even if we are sick, we have medicine that helps us live longer through sickness, with sickness. Even people with AIDS can now live dozens of years after they contract the disease, and sometimes even function normally. So we do live longer, and if living longer is a sign of progress, then today's modern man has progressed when compared to the Europeans of the last few centuries. We have no data of what existed before, and we can also see what happens today in non-industrialized societies, in rural areas, and in places that have not been put under the force of progress of industrial modernization. So we know that in many areas in Africa and Asia, some people manage to live a long and healthy life if they manage to survive the first years of their childhood, for example, and survive wars, survive dangerous animals, and survive disease throughout. So if a person is strong enough in these places, we know that some people live to 100 and beyond. And if we ask ourselves and logically try to understand what happened, for example, 10,000 years ago, we could think that more or less the same has happened. If you survived animal attacks and childhood diseases that were fewer in those times because animals were not domesticated, and animals are a source of a lot of our diseases, domesticated animals, that is, and food. If there was food, when they had enough food, they had a varied diet which allowed them to be healthier. They did not rely solely on grains as we do. Their meat selection was much more diverse because they hunted whatever they found. They were not constricted by religious considerations such as not eating this or that animal. Their lifestyle was much healthier since they moved constantly, they were much more active. So if they managed to escape death by disease or animals, they had a chance of living a long and healthy life. Of course, we don't know this for sure, this is speculation, but it is a reasonable speculation, and we don't have any statistical information. So we don't know, let's say, how many died in childhood, how many were eaten by animals, etc. We can guess that in general, statistically, our lifespan is as big as it ever was, and that we have progressed in terms of our lifespan. But when we talk about health and wellness, we should look at other elements of our lives besides lifespan, because you can live a long life but an unhealthy one. And this brings us to the question, have we progressed in terms of health? Because when we said that we are weaker and less flexible and slower than we were before, it should not necessarily entail that we are also less healthy. So let's ask ourselves, what are the things required for a person to be healthy? What does our body need the most? So first of all, we need air. We should look at the air that we breathe and compare it to the air that people breathed before us. Second thing is water. We should look at the water that we drink and compare it. Third is food. And fourth is community support, because it is known that humans need the warmth and support of a community in order to be healthy and well. So for our wellness and health, we want to check the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, and our community, and then compare it to the air, water, and food and community that existed before us. And here we come up with unsurprising results, because in all of these four categories, today's modern man suffers greatly compared to prehistoric man. And let's see how. There's no question that the air that we breathe today is more polluted and less healthier than the air breathed by humans 10,000, 20,000 years ago. There's no question about it. Air has been polluted by us, industry, cars, airplanes, factories. Just our way of life pollutes the air that we breathe constantly. So we can declare without question that we have regressed in terms of the air, the quality of the air that we breathe. What about water? Water today is a scarce resource in many areas of the world, and in many areas of the world, water is also not as clean and fresh and pure as it was in nature, the same nature that our forefathers lived in thousands of years ago. Water is also polluted by industry and by our way of life. This is not true universally, probably. I'm not an expert on water. There may be places where people can get unlimited, fresh, clean water, but we do know that it is not the case in many areas of the world, where even if we have enough water, we constantly have to worry about the quality of the water. So in terms of our water consumption, we can say that we certainly haven't progressed, and we may have regressed, at least in some geographical areas. What about food? We tell ourselves that we have more food than ever. Still, there are many millions of people around the world who simply do not have enough food and are hungry. And many others who may have enough food, but they have very limited variety of food. People who live on rice, on a few staples that are supposed to be enough for them. And these are very low in nutritional value and certainly have a negative effect on the health of the people who are forced to eat these foods. So who do we compare ourselves to? Because if we compare ourselves to, let's say, Europeans 200, 300 years ago, we don't know exactly what their selection of food was. It must have been natural because there was really no industry. So in this sense, they were better off than us, but it might have been scarce and even less varied than the food we have today. So we might have progressed compared to them. But compared to the people who inhabited the earth 20, 30,000 years ago, these people gathered fresh fruits and nuts and hunted whatever animal was in their surroundings. So they had a diet which had no gluten, they had no sugar in their diet, they had fresh meat that is natural, organic. Everything they ate was organic, and they had a much more varied diet most of the time compared to us. So again, in the subject of food, we cannot say that we have progressed. We might have very large quantities, but they are unequally distributed, and the quality of the food, all this processed food, sugar, gluten, all these chemicals that are put in the food, all these chemicals that we get in our food, we cannot say that we eat healthier today than humans ate 20, 30,000 years ago. So in the area of food, again, we cannot talk of real progress. The fourth element that we wanted to talk about was communal support, the sense of belonging to a group, not being lonely, being protected by a group. And here, again, modern life doesn't offer any encouraging signs, because as far as we know, older societies, traditional societies that existed 20, 30,000 years ago were very close-knit. The few families that lived together and hunted together and gathered food together were very close. They helped each other raise the children. They supported each other through disease, through any kind of trouble that they came across. And the people felt protected and felt a part of a community. Today in the modern world, people are stuffed into small apartments, and we talk about most of the people who live in what we call modern progressive societies. People are stuffed into small apartments or big apartments where they are separated from their larger family, sometimes even from their closer family. People think that the more space they have for themselves, the better off they are, which sometimes, so they distance themselves from other people, which means the communal support that is so necessary for humans, for our health and wellness, suffers. So again, and this is a big subject, which is probably deserves much more attention. We are less better off today in terms of the support we get from a community of humans than we were 10,000 years ago. Most of us are lonelier, separated from the people who are close to us, and suffer in consequence. So our wellness, our health is not as good as it would have been had we had better communal support. So we talked about air, food, water, and communal support, and saw that all of them, we either have not progressed, or more accurately, we have regressed from what we had thousands of years ago. We somehow tell ourselves that we are better off, but if we look at the basics, we see that our basics suffer in comparison to what we had thousands of years ago. And on top of all of that, we know today medicine has proven what was supposed to be common sense. Humans are born to move. Movement is necessary for our health. And so many people today, especially the more modern we are, move less. We sit in front of the TV, in front of the computer, in our cars, in the trains, in the airplanes. We sit. We sit and sit. And sitting is not moving. So in terms of basic movement, which is necessary for our health, and which is probably the cause of our weakness, of our lack of flexibility, and of many problems that we suffer from, we have really regressed. Certainly we can't talk about any progress physically when we see how much we sit and compare it to the movement, constant movement that societies experienced and enjoyed thousands of years ago. And of course, everything that we have mentioned in this thinking process that has just been going on is a basis for much more elaborating and contemplation. And certainly it is not the final word on the subject. So I would thank you and appreciate it if you place your comments and your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.